Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs urgent briefing with regard to the recent wave of terror assaults in Jerusalem and an attempted terror attack in Kadumim, which was foiled at the last minute. We felt that creating some perspective and context for this recent spate of attacks, really representing the worst terror assaults that Israel has faced in a good number of years, almost 15 years, for this type of fatal result. We at the center, led by Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, former head of intelligence assessment at Amman, Israeli military intelligence, as far as former Director General of the Strategic Affairs Ministry, Yoni ben Menachem, a longtime Arab affairs analyst and former Director General of the Israel Broadcast Authority, who's been covering Palestinian affairs since 1983 in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, and perhaps will be joined shortly by Khaled Abu Toameh, who is also a Palestinian affairs reporter for the Jerusalem Post and a longtime news producer for NBC News and other outlets. I'm Dan Diker at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to share with you, our friends and family, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, that following Friday and Saturday morning, Shabbat mornings, terror atrocities, we began to see a lot more media commentary as well as public officials in Israel, noting that the Palestinian Authority has really become, over these years, a center for incitement to terror, for incentivization to terror, for rabid anti-Semitic discourse coming out of the Palestinian Authority for 30 years of its existence. And this is, of course, its 30th birthday. And we wanted to continue this analytic trend that we really, I think, saw in a pronounced way yesterday, more than really ever before, about the Palestinian Authority's role in promoting, incentivizing, and inciting to terrorism and the killing of Israelis. Yoni, would you start out giving us some of your briefly some of your thoughts about what do these terror attacks yesterday mean in a deeper sense? This is not something that just happened out of nowhere. There's been a long through line that brought us to today. You've been writing about this for many years for the Jerusalem Center, and please share with our supporters and our friends and family of the Jerusalem Center. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Yoni.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. I see two major reasons for what we saw in Jerusalem, the two terror attacks on Shabbat, on Saturday. This was expected. It's not surprising at all. The first reason is the increasing incitement by the PA, Palestinian Authority, by the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and also Jordan, especially the parliament in Jordan, who are inciting very intensively in the last three weeks since the visit of Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir in the Temple Mount, and especially after the IDF operation in Jenin refugee camp. They are inciting intensively for terror attacks, and this is one of the reasons that we saw these attacks. They surprised us because everybody was expecting a new wave of terrorism towards Ramadan, which will be the holy month of Ramadan. That will be in 2 months, which is parallel to Pesach, the holiday of Pesach. But apparently the attacks came sooner. This was surprising, but it was expected in a way, as I said, as a result of the incitement. The second factor that I want to talk about, which is a major factor, is that these what we call the individual who make terrorism, the lone wolves in a professional language, They are trying to copycat or imitate the armed terrorists in the West Bank. We have a very dangerous phenomena in the north of the West Bank that started as a result of the war, Shomer HaChomot in Hebrew, yes, and on May 2021, now they are started the process as a result of the war in Gaza, started the process in the north of the West Bank when individual started to set up terror groups. It started independently with local initiatives in Nablus and in Jenin, but then it was supported by the terror organizations like Islamic Jihad, most Islamic Jihad and Fatah, the Shuhada al-Aqsa brigade, and the other factions, also Hamas, Popular Front. But today it's mainly controlled by the Islamic Jihad and financed by the Islamic Jihad, and also financed by Iran, by the Revolutionary Guards. We're talking today about a very dangerous phenomena because according to security sources in Israel, we're talking about 1,000 armed terrorists in the north of the West Bank, in Nablus and Jenin areas. And we are talking about a few thousand illegal weapons and big quantities of ammunition that they have in their possession. And what is very worrying is that the Palestinian Authority lost all the security control that it had on the north of the West Bank, and these areas now are controlled by the armed military or terrorist groups, and the Palestinian Authority cannot do anything about it because they don't want to try by force to fight these terrorists, and they just leave them to control this area. This is very alarming because it's not only a danger to the settlers who live in the West Bank and to the Israeli army that is patrolling the main roads in the north of the West Bank. It's also a danger to the Israeli citizens in Israel itself. Last week, the Israeli army had to go into a Jenin refugee camp to thwart a terror attack that was planned inside Israel. And this was the aim of this military operation, during which 9 Palestinians were killed. 8 of them were terrorists who were shooting at the IDF soldiers and also were involved in planning the attack inside Israel. There was another Palestinian woman that was killed by mistake. It's not clear yet whether she was shot by mistake by the IDF soldiers or by the terrorists themselves. But most of the Palestinians who were killed there were terrorists. And this is something that we have to take into account. Now, what happened is that, as I said, these armed groups started to grow, and they became the symbol of the young generation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And what we saw in Jerusalem, these 2 terrorists who made the attacks on Shabbat, on Saturday, they are simply looking to imitate or to copycat the terrorist action of these military groups that are very active on TikTok, on the social media, and they became the heroes of the younger generation. And if you add to this the big incitement that I talked about by the PA and the Hamas and the Jordan, then you have a new formula for terrorism. And this is something which is very worrying. Now, the Israeli governments of Bennett and Lapid and Gantz, they decided to deal with this dangerous phenomena only by a daily arrest operation. Every night, the IDF soldiers, they go into the areas of the north of the West Bank to carry out attacks, to carry out arrests in order to capture the wanted terrorists based on the information that they get from the Shin Bet, from the Shabak, Israeli Shabak, trying to stop terror attacks. But the infrastructure is still there, and these daily arrests of the IDF, they are not enough to dismantle the terror infrastructure in the north of the West Bank. What is required is a big military operation by the IDF to go into the north of the West Bank temporarily. I'm not saying to occupy and stay there. I'm saying to go into these areas for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and make a big arrest operation and dismantle the terror infrastructure that is there. The Bennett and the Lapid governments, they refrained from doing that because of American pressure, because the Biden administration did not want them to make something that might lead to more violence and escalation, even though it is necessary military-wise. There's no other way to uproot the terrorists only by daily arrest. You have to go and clean the whole area from these terrorist cells. This has not been done so far. And I personally expect the Netanyahu government, the new right-wing government, to do something about it, something seriously, and not just daily arrest. This is not enough to stop the terrorism. And if we do not do that, then we can expect terror attacks inside Israel. Yesterday, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, he spoke to the media about what is expected in the coming weeks, and he said that we Hamas are going to a very big confrontation, unprecedented confrontation with the Israelis in the coming weeks, and is already preparing the ground for a new intifada. And also the Hamas is initiating with the Fatah a big hunger strike, in the Israeli prisons of the terrorists that are arrested in Israeli prisons, the security prisoners, as we call them. They are planning during Ramadan a big hunger strike that will be putting more gasoline on the fire of the intifada, and this is what they're actually planning, according to Ismail Haniyeh, a big military confrontation with Israel in the coming weeks. I can't hear you.
There we go. Just a point of clarification. Historically, what we've seen when the Hamas undertakes a big operation, terror operation against Israel, the audience is really, or the target is really the Palestinian Authority, no less than it is public opinion in Israel and Israeli civilians. There's an internal war that's been going on that perhaps the Hamas sees it as an opportune time now to exert its power and influence over the Palestinian street.
What we see is, of course, the Hamas does not only want to fight against Israel, they want to destabilize the Palestinian Authority rule in the West Bank, and they want to achieve two points, two aims. One is to bring a new intifada that will be against Israel, and the intifada also will be to topple Abu Mazen rule in the West Bank. So this way they will gain two things at the same time. This is their purpose. Abu Mazen knows that, And what the PA should have done is act against these terror groups in the West Bank and dismantle the infrastructure of Hamas. Abu Mazen is doing that only towards the infrastructure of Hamas, which is threatening his rule. But if the infrastructure is acting against Israel, is not doing anything. And this is what actually is happening in the north of the West Bank. As long as the terrorists in the north of the West Bank are not threatening Ramallah, where the Muqata is, where is the office of Abu Mazen, as long as it's not threatened by them, so it doesn't do anything, because they are aiming their guns towards the Israeli army and not towards the PA security forces. He says he tries to explain it that he doesn't want a civil war, a Palestinian civil war, and this is why he's not operating against the armed terrorist groups in the west, in the north of the West Bank. But of course, Israel cannot accept that, because according to the Oslo Accords, he has to fight terrorism in the West Bank.
Thank you very much, Yoni. I'll just turn to General Kuperwasser and ask General Kuperwasser, you've been writing and speaking for decades, since you were the head of military intelligence assessment on the Palestinians for decades. Here we have a situation as Yoni laid out, and we will take questions and answers. By the way, if people that are joining us would like to send questions, please send them through the Q&A, and then we will address them after our experts will offer their opening observations and comments. Yossi, what we hear from Yoni is this paradoxical situation where the Palestinian Authority is weak and unwilling to confront armed terror militias in the northern West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Jenin, and specifically Nablus and Jenin. And yet, at the same time, as Yoni sent me this morning, here's an official Palestinian Authority document that is full of massive incitement to the imams, to the religious leaders around the Palestinian Authority areas, calling for violence and terrorism against Israel in the context of the shahidim, of the sacrificers for Allah. A message that was trumpeted and broadcast on Israeli radio this morning. What do we make of this paradox, General Kuperwasser, where you have a Palestinian Authority that's 30 years old, that's been called Israel's security coordination partner and on some level political partner, and yet on the one hand it does nothing it's lost control of many areas under its supposed control and its legal control. And on the other hand, it is promoting terrorism, incitement, and incentivization and anti-Semitism. What do you do? How do we understand this situation? What can be done about it?
First of all, good evening, everybody. And secondly, there's no paradox. It's totally in line with what the Palestinian Authority is trying to establish and achieve. Palestinian Authority tries to promote the Palestinian national interest as the way they see it. That's what they're trying to do. If at certain times it serves the interest to have less terror, they would have less terror. If at certain times they believe that more terror is necessary in order to promote the possibility of achieving the interests of the Palestinian people, then they would have more terror. And in their mind, I'll say a few words about what are the interests, the way they see them. But in their mind, for quite a while, since the progress made on the Abraham Accords, they feel that the Palestinian issue is marginalized. They feel that they lose the leverage they had over Israel with the warming relations between Israel and the Arab world. And to compensate for that and to bring Israel back to doing what they wanted to do, they promote terrorism. And there's no effort by the Palestinian Authority to prevent terrorism. And as a matter of fact, this comes on the background of an ongoing effort of the Palestinians throughout the 30 years of the existence of the Palestinian Authority of cementing a certain narrative, certain consciousness infrastructure in the minds of the Palestinians, especially the young generation, but all the Palestinians, and doing the same, by the way, in the international community, what we call the legitimization of Israel and all of that. These are all combined efforts that are supposed to make it possible for the Palestinians to promote their interest. And their interest is first and foremost to make sure that they get the opportunity to establish a state, Palestinian state, and all of the areas taken by Israel in '67, including East Jerusalem as the capital of that state, while at the same time forcing Israel to accept some responsibility for the problem of the refugees, and to make sure that they don't give up their dream and their vision of establishing a Palestinian state over all of Palestine, namely all of Israel. And that's why the Palestinians still are committed to the idea of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And they still believe that all means are legitimate in order to promote this goal, and including the use of violence and terror. That's why the Palestinian Authority, according to the law adopted in 2004 and later on a little bit changed in 2013, looks at the terrorists as the fighting sector of the Palestinian society, and that's why they pay them salaries if they are arrested, and that's why they are totally committed to the battle against Israel. Using terrorism is something that they teach the children in school, that this is the very noble act, and this is why they keep having all those sermons that you were and the messages that you mentioned a minute ago. And they build this infrastructure of hatred, this infrastructure of readiness to carry out terror attacks day in, day out. And from time to time, they also give the order and the precise incitement to actually do that, not only use it as some sort of an infrastructure. And when they do deliver this message, there's always enough terrorists who are going to say to themselves, since we are very agitated by the basic infrastructure that calls for terrorism, and now that somebody says that Ben Gvir went to the Temple Mount, or 9 Palestinians were killed in Jenin, and of course by the Palestinians they are presented as totally innocent victims, not Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists that were planning a terror attack inside Israel, but as innocent civilians who were murdered viciously by Israel. Then some of the Palestinians would say to themselves, oh, time has come for me to do something about it. And since this incitement goes along also with the use of religious elements as well, it's very easy to make people go out and carry out the attacks. And it may sometimes be a 13-year-old boy or 24-year-old boy or a youngster or sometimes even 50-year-old person. We had some of these carrying out attacks in recent weeks. Now, it's not that we are in a new peak in the sense that we had 7 people killed, but this peak has been steady for the last year or so, and it didn't cause more damage because we kept entering the Palestinian villages and towns day in, day out as well, and foiling terror attacks. We foiled so many terror attacks during that year that you cannot count them anymore. And but of course, you cannot foil everything, and from time to time something goes out, and from time to time you get terrible results like we got this last Friday, and it happens. That's part of the ongoing battle that we are fighting.
And
Now,
Yossi, can I just ask you a question? Someone has asked a question in here in our chat, and he's asked before about disincentive. How, from your point of view, how does the IDF and Israel on a political level create a disincentive for these acts of terror and political violence?
So I think we have to do 2 things. First of all, to deal with this ongoing effort of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas as well, to entrench this infrastructure of hatred in the minds of and hatred and the support of terror in the minds of the Palestinians. And the way to do that is to punish them and to take away the money from them, and to make it clear that if they keep doing that, this would have consequences on their ability to operate. And that's one thing. And the other thing is on the level of the would-be terrorists. The way to deal with them is to take all kinds of actions that now the government is talking about, beyond blocking their houses and later on demolishing them. We have to take action against the families if they support the terrorists, and most of the time they do. We have to take action in order to make sure that they don't get money from the Palestinian Authority. It's not enough to tell the Palestinian Authority not to give them money. It's also necessary to make sure that they don't get the money. And we have a list of people speak about adopting the death penalty for terror attacks, and so on and so forth. So we have ways with which we can deter them. Although I must say, deterrence is not easy to achieve. It's because these people, most of them are ready to get killed in their operations. They do what they do both because of the general incitement and because they are agitated by radical Islamic interpretations they give to their activities. And they believe that they are going to, for them, it's some sort of a wedding in which they're going to have 72
Virgins
to waiting for them in heaven. We can't compete with this
incentive.
incentive.
Disincentive, yeah.
But so it's not easy, but it can be done, especially if we threaten the well-being of the families. And the idea of moving them out of Israel or out of the territories is another possibility, the possible act that can be done in order to deter them. The government, or the cabinet, the security cabinet, has discussed all these issues this morning and adopted some steps in this direction. More steps can be discussed later, and there's got to be some sort of legislation that would make it possible. But this is on the table. Now, one last thing that I want to say is that we have to remember also the input of two things. First of all, Yoni referred to that, but this decentralization of the use of force, of the responsibility for the use of force, is, on the one hand, it's a result of the weakening of the PA and the weak conditions that it suffers. But on the other hand, it's something that everybody enjoys. The PA is happy with the decentralization of the responsibility for force in its territory, because it gives it the ability to deny its direct responsibility. So does Hamas. So we see that most of the terror activists are coming now from organizations that are not the old kind of organizations, or are carried out by, as Yoni referred to them as lone wolves. There's no such thing as lone wolves. Those lone wolves are activated by this system that I mentioned before of preparation and incitement that makes them happen and make them carry out the attacks. But this is very good for deniability. You can say, what do you want from me? I was trying to help, but I just couldn't do it because I'm weak, and don't blame me, so don't take any action against me. No, they are responsible. And the second thing I want to say that we shouldn't ignore the role of Iran in all of that. Yoni mentioned that in passing, and I think it's very important, because what caused the last upsurge of activities was the planning of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is an organization that is financed and following orders from Iran to carry out a big terror attack inside Israel. That was also referred to by Yoni. And Israel had to intervene in order to prevent that, and that caused the death of the 9 people in Jenin, including this lady. And this was used in order to further agitate some of the people, including these people in Jerusalem that carried out the attacks. So it's the Iranians, even though they failed in making the Palestinian Islamic Jihad carry out the attack, they got what they wanted. There is an upsurge of terrorism and an upsurge of there's an escalation. That's what they want, escalation that would weaken Israel and strengthen Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad at the expense of the PA. That's something they want to see happening.
Khaled, I'm just going to turn to you and pick up on what General Kuperwasser said. And you have a situation, as I've heard you analyze for many, many decades, actually, since the Palestinian Authority was actually established in 1995, following the Oslo Exchange of Letters in 1993. And you've been saying ever since its establishment that, it plays a double game or a triple game, and that it looks like the violent and even bloody fruits, if you can use that analogy, have really been reached here, because both Yossi and Yoni have said, you have a Palestinian Authority, which is a central address, but it doesn't like being the central address because it prefers to have deniability, so that as long as these terror militias are not attacking the security forces of the PA, then everybody, Iranian-backed PIJ, Hamas, and other terror militias in Nablus and other cities, frankly, Jenin and Nablus and other cities, can operate with impunity. Where does that leave Israel and the PA in terms of a relationship? And what is the disincentive to the PA, and what can be done going forward in your view?
Well, Dan, I don't think that Israel alone would be capable of changing the Palestinian Authority or forcing the Palestinian Authority to change. I agree with what Yoni said before about the massive incitement that the Palestinian Authority is spearheading. The messages coming out of the Palestinian Authority are very, very bad. These are the kind of messages that prompt young Palestinians to take to the streets and kill the first Jew they meet. Now, in addition to the Israeli punitive measures or the security measures on the ground, what we don't see is international pressure on the Palestinian Authority itself. Where is the US pressure on the Palestinian Authority? Where's the European Union pressure? Where's the international community in all of this? Why are they not going to President Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian leadership and telling them this has to end? I believe that the international community, especially the US administration and the Europeans who fund the Palestinian Authority, they can play a major role in bringing about changes in the way the Palestinian Authority is, performing. The Palestinian Authority is like an old car. It's a 30-year-old car, but with a very bad engine. Its engine is about to die, and they are playing a double game. On the one hand, they pretend to be the peace partners, and that they are the state of Palestine, and that they have security forces, and that they are in control. But on the other hand, they're unleashing this massive wave of incitement against Israel. And when it's convenient for them, they say we are not in control. And when it's not convenient for them, they just say, we have nothing to do with this, or they blame Israel. What is happening in the last year in the West Bank reminds me of the days before the Palestinian Authority lost Gaza. This is when the Palestinian Authority stopped cracking down on Hamas and Islamic Jihad, stopped fulfilling its obligations according to the Oslo Accords, which is to fight terrorism. In the end, the Palestinian Authority lost Gaza. They were forced to run away from Gaza, and Gaza was controlled by Hamas. And I look at the situation on the ground, and I travel a lot through the West Bank, and I see that large parts of the West Bank are today controlled by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and even gunmen or armed groups belonging to Fatah, the faction that is headed by President Mahmoud Abbas, but who are unruly, who do not even report to Abbas. So what we are seeing is the Palestinian Authority losing control, of the situation, and this is very dangerous. If the international community does not step in and start employing heavy pressure on the Palestinian Authority to change, I'm not saying that the Palestinian Authority needs to be dismantled. What I'm saying is the Palestinian Authority is a very sick patient. It is now in the intensive care unit. and someone needs to step in and say, enough is enough. We need to create a new reality. The Palestinian Authority, which is actually the PLO under a different name, has lost the confidence of its people. They don't trust it. This is playing into the hands of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other groups. And this is very dangerous. It poses a threat not only to Israel, but to the Palestinian Authority itself and to the Palestinian public in general. Do we really want to lose the West Bank? Do we want to see more scenes of anarchy and lawlessness? So what I'm saying is we want to see international pressure on the Palestinian Authority. It's time for change. It's time for new leadership. It's time for the Palestinian Authority to change its ways, to change its performance, both on the ground and as a partner to signed agreements with Israel. A short while ago, the CIA director, William Burns, met with President Abbas. And we didn't hear yet any pressure from the Americans on President Abbas. In fact, President Abbas used that meeting to again call on the U.S. administration to put pressure on Israel. So I would have liked to see the Americans or Mr. Burns and Blinken, who is expected to visit Ramallah later this week, to tell President Abbas enough is enough. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a diplomatic intifada against Israel and at the same time allow all these terrorist attacks against Israel from areas that are under your control. We've seen that when the Palestinian Authority wants to operate, it does. When it wants to crack down on its political opponents and human rights activists, it does do it. It does, flex its muscles. But when it comes to preventing terrorist attacks or disarming all these militias and gangs and mafias roaming the Palestinian street, we don't see any action. We actually see the Palestinian Authority glorifying these people, encouraging them, radicalizing them, and sending them a message that it's okay to continue with what you are doing. The Palestinian Authority is today in a state where it cannot even condemn the terrorist attacks that took place in Jerusalem in the past 48 hours. Why? Because it has radicalized its people against Israel to a point where it can no longer even condemn a terrorist attack against Israel. Mm-hmm. So we are looking at a Palestinian Authority that is acting against the interests of its own people, is continuing to violate the Oslo Accords and all signed agreements with Israel. They've even stopped the security coordination with Israel, and we don't see pressure on the Palestinian Authority. So what I'm saying is the following. No matter what measures Israel takes, these are not sufficient as long as they are not accompanied by international pressure on the Palestinian Authority. In the past, we saw that the Palestinian Authority, when it comes under pressure or threats even from the international community, it does take some steps, or it does, comply, and it does do some of the things that we are asking them to do. So it's time for international pressure before it's too late, before we see total anarchy and chaos in the West Bank. And as I said, the failure to do so, to intervene right now, will see the rise of another Islamist state in the West Bank.
This is one of the reasons why, thank you, Khaled, for that very sharp overview. I wanted to mention to our friends on the broadcast that one of the reasons the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs has undertaken what we call the Palestinian Reform Initiative or the Palestinian Accountability Initiative is exactly to expand on what you, Khaled, have said, what General Kuperwasser and what Yoni ben Menachem have said. All of you are working on this unprecedented, frankly, compendium, which is meant to draw public, international, and public and governmental attention to all the violations of the Palestinian Authority that has generated a situation that seems to be, from a security point of view, intolerable, and is leading to sort of an Islamist, the beginnings of an Islamist move in the West Bank that is in which the PA has lost operational control. This compendium which which in the coming months should be completed. The hope and the expectation is that government leaders and parliaments, their attention will be drawn to these sort of massive across-the-board violations. Khaled, in your view, you talk about international pressure. Do you see this initiative as well, as you're one of the heads of the initiative, together with General Kuperwasser, that this type of let's call it applied research-driven applied diplomacy and policy book would draw that type of attention to international actors and decision makers in ways that they otherwise wouldn't have the information in order to be influenced and bring that pressure on the Palestinian Authority?
Yes, first of all, I believe that this is the first initiative of its kind. What we are doing at the center, the JCPA, is unprecedented. We are coming now to the international community and saying it's time for change. We cannot continue like this. If you, the international community, are sincere about ending the violence and de-escalating the situation, then you need to join us in bringing about changes, real changes. It's time for real changes. It's time to think outside the box. It's time to look at the Palestinian Authority as being part of the problem, not the solution. And we need to highlight all the negative things that the Palestinian Authority has been doing, especially in the last few years, such as the radicalization of Palestinians, such as acting more as an adversary or as an enemy of Israel than as a peace partner, such as the corruption and all these other things. It's time for real action. As I said before, this is the last opportunity. We're talking about a 30-year-old Palestinian Authority that has lost the credibility, its own credibility amongst its own people. Look at all the public opinion polls. More than 75% of the Palestinians want President Abbas to step down. More than 80% of the Palestinians say that the Palestinian Authority is very corrupt, and this is playing into the hands of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Contrary to what the Palestinian Authority claims, it's not Israel's military operations that are empowering Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It's the Palestinian Authority's corruption. It's their bad government. It's their failure to hold elections. It's their failure to reform. It's their failure to allow the emergence of new leadership. These are the things that are really playing into the hands of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and of course, Iran and all these bad guys. And if we don't step in right now and start taking actions and demanding the accountability from the Palestinian Authority, then it's a lost case. The Biden administration keeps talking about reviving the peace process, about the two-state solution. You cannot achieve these things under the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority. We need to start, thinking of a new approach. And this approach, as I said, should be based on going to the Palestinian Authority and trying to, or putting pressure on them to change. We even want to see new leadership over there. If that does not happen, as I said, we will end up with Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or we will end up with all kinds of gangs running the Palestinian areas in the West Bank, and this is very dangerous. It's very dangerous for Palestinians, it's very dangerous for Israel, and it's very dangerous for stability in the region. And I would also suggest that we bring in Egypt, Jordan, and the Arab countries that are party to the Abraham Accords, because I believe that they share my views and the views of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs about the need for reform and change in the Palestinian Authority. I hear a lot from many Arabs that they are also fed up with the Palestinian Authority. They don't understand what the Palestinian Authority really wants. They don't want to go back to any negotiating table with Israel. They don't want to enforce law and order. They don't want to reform. They don't want to combat corruption. And this is very bad. We are revolving in a vicious cycle, and it's time for change. So we want to bring about this change, and that's why we are trying to draw the international or the world's attention to all these things.
Yoni, just and Yossi, do you think, following what Khaled said, that collective punishment? Do you think that collective punishment, as some of our listeners and viewers have been asking, is a possibility? You know, there has been a suggestion made by someone that there should be broader collective punishment in order to put pressure on individual, perhaps radicalized youth, not to undertake these terror attacks. A, is that possible? And B, is international pressure really possible when it appears that the United States-led Western alliance has really branded almost a type of messianic view of a two-state solution, as if that's really, you know, there's no indication that we're any closer to that than we were 30 years ago, as Khaled has pointed out time and time again. Do you think that you know, there is really any prospect for that type of international pressure to force reform of the Palestinian Authority? Yoni, and then Yossi, the same question. And
I don't think that the Netanyahu government will go on this path to put collective punishments on terrorists and the families. This is forbidden by international law, and the Netanyahu government will not violate the international law and will not go there. This will only make it look more extreme, and it will be a boomerang for Israel to go on this path. So we have to look for other ways, and there are many ideas that I think the cabinet, security cabinet, is now checking in order to adopt them later on. But I think the collective punishment is out of the question. As for putting an international pressure on the Palestinian Authority by the Biden administration and by the European Union, I think that the Biden administration is sure that if they do that, if they go to put pressure on the Palestinian, it might collapse. This is what Abu Mazen, this is the tactic of Abu Mazen to frighten the Biden administration, and he tells them, if you put pressure on us, we will collapse, and this is something that you don't want. So I also don't estimate that they will go and put pressure on Abu Mazen. I think that what they're trying, and also trying to convince the Israeli government, they succeeded in convincing Lapid government to try and assist the PA, and this is why the former defense minister Benny Gantz, this is why he started meeting with Abu Mazen and other senior officials in the Palestinian Authority, and he gave them money, he gave them big loan of 500 million shekels in order to revive what they say the Palestinian economy. And they also made many gestures to the Palestinian Authority as far as giving permits to workers and unification of families and so on. So I think that the Biden administration is convinced that the PA is in trouble and we should help them and not to put pressure on them.
And Yossi, General Kuperwasser, it seems with a lot of comments coming from our folks who are joining us this evening, and one of the common theme is that, you know, we simply can't depend on the international community for anything. I mean, not the Arab states, and not even though they are partners in the Abraham Accords, and not the Europeans and not the Americans. The only people that can really make change, or the only country, is Israel. Do you agree with that assessment? You think that does Israel, and in fact, according to the Palestinian Authority Reform and Accountability Initiative, which we're undertaking, that could actually influence the decision-making power, and ability of Israel on a political level, and by extension, Israel's friends and allies in the region and across the Atlantic.
Well, first of all, I think that it's really first and foremost upon us to take action. We cannot complain to the rest of the world before we take action ourselves. And, you know, I was speaking with American officials recently, and when we were under the former government, and they were complaining to me that yes, it's true that they were trying to give money to the PA in order to, as was mentioned here, to save it from collapsing. But the Israeli government was giving money to the Palestinian Authority even more, giving it all kinds of loans. So don't complain to us when you yourself is not doing the what you're preaching for. I think this government is a little bit different. I think the decision taken by the Security Cabinet 2 weeks ago to implement immediately the deduction law and to take away from the Palestinian Authority the money that they spend on paying salaries to terrorists was a sign, and also taking 139 million shekels for compensating victims of terror, was a sign to the Palestinians that the old game is over and there's a new game in town. And according to the old game, the government would implement the deduction law, but simultaneously give the same amount to the Palestinians as a loan, which made the mockery of the entire idea of the law. This government is not, I hope, I think, is not going to make the same mistake. And this means that the Palestinians understand that there is finally a price for paying salaries to terrorists, and they have to reassess their attitude. This government is trying to put pressure on the Palestinians in another way, which is promoting the option of having some normalization with Saudi Arabia. If we manage to do that, this is going to be a very clear price that the Palestinians are going to pay, because they believe that still, if something was left out of the option of having leverage over Israel through the Arab world, this is Saudi Arabia. If we manage to break out in this respect, this is going to be something that is going to be very painful for the Palestinians. I'm not talking about punishments, collective punishments. That is out of the question. But the PA is directly responsible for what's going on, and we should take steps against the PA. And I totally agree with everything that Khaled said on how problematic the PA is from the point of view of not keeping its commitment according to the Oslo Accords, not delivering on anything, being a very bad governing option for the Palestinian people themselves, being so corrupt and so on, not taking care of their real interest of promoting peace and creating the conditions for prosperity for them. This is the kind of things that we should lead us in taking steps. And I think that at the same time, we should continue our effort to convince the rest of the world through the project we are holding and through other means. I was interviewed today to a German big paper, and tomorrow I'm speaking to the Australian Broadcasting Service and Corporation, and I think that we should continue with the paper we are preparing and with the efforts we are contemplating, and with the interviews and all of that, deliver the message that the international community, if they want to see a better situation here in the Middle East, they should put pressure on the PA to stop paying salaries to terrorists and to stop and to change the effort to promote this totally devastating narrative that they hold. And first and foremost, we have to convince the Americans to do that. It's, before we go to the Europeans, we have to convince the Americans to do that. The Americans are not doing it. And I fully agree with what Khaled said, and the criticism he had about the way the Americans handled this matter, because I don't think that Barnes should have met Abu Mazen under these conditions. And after this attack, the first thing Barnes should have done was to cancel the meeting. And instead of that, we see them keep meeting Abu Mazen and hoping that he's going to stay in power. I'm not against him staying in power, but the way to make him stay in power for a purpose, that it's not staying in power just for staying in power. It's staying in power in order to promote a certain concept of peace, concept of refraining from carrying out terror attacks. This is not what he's doing. So as long as he's serving a different concept, we should not cater to him. And Blinken is going to meet him, and everybody. You know, speaking today was the German journalist that I was mentioning before. And he told me that the most terrible thing that happened with Germany was the fact that Abu Mazen was standing next to the chancellor and Schulz, and was speaking about 50 Holocausts that Israel was carrying out against the Palestinians, and the chancellor did nothing about it. Didn't criticize. This was just standing there looking at Abu Mazen as if nothing happened. Whereas if anybody in Germany would have said it, he would have gone to jail. This is the attitude of, you know, Abu Mazen is in a position in the international community right now where he can easily get away with murder. And he gets away with murder every day. And something has to change in this policy. But I don't think that we are going to be able to get the international community adopted a different approach easily. It's going to be difficult. And first of all, they have to be impressed by the fact that Israel has taken a different approach. And unlike what Gantz used to do, meeting Abu Mazen, helping him, and so on and so forth. There are three options regarding the Palestinian Authority. There's an option of strengthening it, which sounds to me very strange under these conditions. There's an option of weakening it, and there's an option of changing it. And not strengthening the Palestinian Authority doesn't mean necessarily weakening it. There's an option of trying to change it, and that's the option we should choose. And yes, it's going to be a long way, but if you know where you're going, then even a long way should not frighten us.
Khaled, just picking up as your last observation here, but before I get to Yoni, and we'll finish up with Yoni's last observation, let's just take what Yossi has just said. Do you believe, from your decades of experience following the Palestinian Authority, writing about thousands of articles about them, that change is possible if and when Mahmoud Abbas leaves the scene? He's 87, he's going to be 88 years old this year. Assuming he steps down at some point in the coming months, or perhaps like the Pope, when he expires, is change possible under a situation where the Arab countries, as Yossi said, led by Saudi Arabia, really forces a change in their behavior? Or would the Arab world be willing to do that? The more people, if Saudi Arabia joins the circle of Abraham Accord members, under what situation would Arab actors, state actors, be able to employ that kind of pressure? And does it have any prospect of working?
Well, then I don't really believe that the Arab countries, under the current circumstances, have leverage with the Palestinians. I mean, let's not forget that the Arab countries do not give the Palestinians money. And if you don't give money, you have no leverage, you have no influence over them. Secondly, I don't see the Arab countries, pressuring the Palestinian Authority under the current circumstances to change its policies. I actually see, the United Arab Emirates rushing to the Security Council to demand, an urgent emergency session about the following the killings of the Palestinians in Jenin, for example. So the Arab leaders are a bit careful when it comes to dealing with the Palestinian issue. We also saw the statements that came from the Saudi foreign minister in response to the talk about normalization with Israel, where he said that there will be no normalization with Israel before a Palestinian state is established. So the Arab leaders are very careful. The Arab leaders also have to take into consideration their own constituents, the people, the Arab masses, and the Arab masses are, hostile to Israel. They're less friendly to Israel, and that worries many of the Arab leaders. That's why I keep saying the Palestinians are almost entirely dependent on American and European taxpayer money, and they are the only ones who have leverage with the Palestinians. Let me give you an example. when the EU, the European Union, came to the Palestinians several years ago and demanded changes in the textbooks, we did see certain changes. Okay, the Palestinian Authority did not, completely change, but they made some changes.
Tactical changes, very tactical and
Yeah,
unimportant changes.
yes. I said, but at least
They always cheat the Europeans. It's so easy to cheat them.
Yes, they made, but another example I would give is what the administration of George Bush and Condoleezza Rice did when they put pressure on Yasser Arafat to share powers with the prime minister. And I think that was in 2003 when Arafat was forced to appoint Abu Mazen as the prime minister, something that Arafat never accepted and he never liked it. But we saw that under pressure, that pressure sometimes works, but you need to keep up the momentum. You can't, demand something and they will do it, and then when they see you turn your back, they will just walk away. You have to follow up on it. Now, the issue of who will succeed Abbas and whether things will change, I really don't see any possibility of real change in the Palestinian Authority in the post-Abbas era, because I look at the people around Abbas and I see them, being very similar to Abbas, if not worse sometimes. What needs to change is the whole system, the whole structure. I mean, the Palestinian Authority, I keep saying, is a bad government. It's functioning more as a mafia, in a mafia toward in its dealings with Israel, in its dealings with the international community, and in its dealings even with its own people. And that's what needs to change. But to anyone who assumes that, Abbas's successor is going to be any better than him, no. Abbas's successor is not going to stop the incitement. He's not going to stand up and tell the Palestinians, okay, it's time for peace and coexistence, and we should abandon violence, and we should think of a new direction for our children and things like that. That's not going to happen. I go to Ramallah several times a week. I meet with Palestinian officials. I still can't find one Palestinian official who will stand up and say in Arabic, it's time to calm down, it's time to stop the violence, it's time to disarm all these armed groups and militias and gangs in Nablus, in Jenin, in Hebron, and other areas. You don't see that. The whole atmosphere is poisonous, it's toxic. You look at Palestine TV and you see that they are broadcasting live the funerals of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad gunmen who are killed by Israel, and they're interviewing their families and they're glorifying them, and they're promoting all this martyrdom, idea. So I don't see the Palestinian Authority changing overnight. That's not going to happen, and certainly not going to happen under any of Abbas's successors, because Abbas's successors are going to be the people around him, one of them. We're not going to hold free, they're not going to have free and democratic elections. They're not going to allow the emergence of new leadership. So you look at the people around Abbas and you see that they are as bad as Abbas. Abbas is playing a double game. I keep saying that. He tells the Americans and the Europeans that he wants to return to the negotiating table. He even told the CIA director this evening that if you put pressure on Israel to halt all its measures, that will hopefully create a horizon for the resumption of the peace process. But that's not the real obstacle. The real obstacle is not Israel's measures on the ground. The real obstacle is that the Palestinian Authority, I don't want to say is losing control. It's allowing all these terror groups to operate freely in areas that are under the control of the Palestinian Authority. When was the last time you saw the Palestinian Authority security forces crack down on the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terror groups. You only see them arresting people who criticize the Palestinian Authority on Facebook. You see them arresting cartoonists and journalists, and even killing human rights activists. And all this is happening while the international community is silent. What Abu Mazen is doing, he is actually misleading and deceiving the international community into thinking that it's all Israel's fault. Yesterday, he held a meeting, another emergency meeting in Ramallah, and after that, he issued a statement, again, blaming Israel for the dangerous escalation. He doesn't want to accept any kind of responsibility, and I don't see anyone in the international community coming to Abu Mazen and saying, hey, what's happening over here? Why do you keep issuing all these statements every 24 hours, putting all the blame on Israel? Are you not going to accept any kind of responsibility? What are you doing to prevent terrorism? How come all these terror groups are allowed to operate in Nablus, in Jenin, areas that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority, areas that the Palestinian Authority has security forces over there, but they're not doing their job? And this is a very serious violation of the Oslo Accords and all agreements signed with Israel. The Palestinian Authority is supposed to prevent terrorism against Israel, not promote it.
No, and Yoni, and just a last word, what Yossi and Khaled have basically suggested is that the leverage point really is in the money. And the leverage point is in whether you're going to withhold support and force change, because at the end of the day, Palestinian Authority wants to continue to control the areas under its control, if for no other reason, because it operates as sort of a pseudo mafia, sometimes less violent, sometimes more violent, always inciting to violence. But at the end of the day, if the most effective punishment, it seems, from what both Yossi and Khaled are saying, to force some sort of change, is really hit the Palestinian Authority hard in the pocketbook. And this is, this may be one of the list of recommendations that we make in the Palestinian Reform Initiative, which we're also calling Palestinian Accountability Initiative. What's your sense about that? Is it really about hitting the Palestinian Authority in the pocketbook with international pressure based on incontrovertible facts that we're going to bring them across the board from the anti-Semitic discourse, massive corruption, incitement to terror, incentivization of terror, and other violations?
I think that this is the only way that was left to do, because nobody tried it, but it will be very difficult for Israel to stop giving the Palestinian Authority the money, the taxes money that Israel collects for them, because this is part of the Oslo Accords. And Israel cannot stop the funds, transferring the funds, because this will be a violation of the Oslo Accord, and this will be an excuse by the Palestinians to keep supporting terrorism. They will say Israel is violating the Oslo agreement. So what do you expect us? How do you want us to fight terrorism if you weaken us? So I don't think that this is a good option. But maybe Israel can delay the payments or do something, try to play with the money in order to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority. But basically, I don't see the international community put real pressure on the Palestinians. Maybe they will just try to do that, and try to show in the media that they're doing that. But actually, on the ground, they will not do that, because the other option is worse than the PA. If you put such pressure on the Palestinians, then you only strengthen Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the other faction of the Palestinian opposition that are against the PA, and this is something that I don't think anyone wants. I don't see Israel wants Hamas to control the West Bank or the Popular Front or the Islamic Jihad. The other options are worse, and we are really in a deadlock. I don't see any way out of that. Even if there will be, if Abu Mazen and Mahmoud Abbas will step down from his presidency, and you will have to find a successor, the only way to do that is through elections. And to hold elections now in the West Bank for presidency is a very dangerous thing, because all indications, and you can see that by reading the latest Palestinian public opinion polls, you can see that most of the Palestinian public in the West Bank support Hamas, and wants Abu Mazen to be removed from presidency. And the candidates that they're talking about is Marwan Barghouti, which is a big terrorist, which is in Israeli prison, and Israel will not release him. And the other option is Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, as the new president. So I don't see a possibility for election because it's not the interest of Israel and not the interest of the United States or the European Union. So we are in a deadlock, and we have to think really seriously about what we do in such a scenario.
Thank you. And just last word, I'll just go back to you, Khaled. From what you're hearing, do you think, is it bottom line deadlock and the height of complexity, or do you see a pathway forward, taking into account what we're doing at the Jerusalem Center?
Well, I think it's a mistake to, sit on the side and say we can't do anything about it and there's no way out of this, dilemma. No, we have to try to find a way, and that's what we are hoping to do at the center, at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It is to come up with a proposal, with an initiative. We call it an initiative. And this initiative is saying we want to force the Palestinian Authority to change. You see, we don't want to bring down the Palestinian Authority because, as Yoni said, the alternative is worse. It's going to be Hamas. And we're not even talking about elections because, again, Yoni is right. If you hold elections today, Hamas is going to win. That's why we want to change the way the Palestinian Authority is functioning, is operating. The Palestinian Authority has become part of the problem, not part of the solution. We want the Palestinian security forces to do exactly what the Oslo Accords say, which is to fight terrorism. It's their failure to fight terrorism is what is empowering Hamas and emboldening Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The Palestinian Authority is weak because it chose to be weak. Israel did not undermine the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is undermining itself by failing to crack down on these terrorists. If Abu Mazen gives a decision tonight or an order to his Palestinian security forces to go into Jenin and into Balata and capture all these terrorists and armed groups and disband them, that would be a first step in the right direction. But he's sitting there doing nothing, and then he complains that Israel is undermining or trying to undermine the Palestinian Authority. And this is what we want to bring to the international community, that the Palestinian Authority is undermining the Palestinian Authority, not Israel. Israel is actually empowering the Palestinian Authority because Israel is going after the terrorists who are a threat to the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, this is clearly the complexity upon which we based the initiative, and we invite everyone to come and join us, partner with us, support us, because we're going to be making a substantial amount of a diplomatic noise, and we'll be publishing in Hebrew, in English, and hopefully, if we have the capability of doing it, in Arabic as well. It seems it's the best way to move forward. Obviously, governments, by their very nature, are constrained by balancing their interests, as we raised on this webinar. And allow me to thank all of you for great insights. Khaled Abu Toameh, Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, and Yoni ben Menachem, among the really, I'm prejudiced, but the three greatest analysts on the Palestinian issue that there is in Israel, and this is one of the specialties of the Jerusalem Center, and we'll make our research and policy and applied diplomacy campaign. It'll be very clear as to the types of actions that we're going to be taking on our research-powered applied diplomacy initiative on called the Palestinian Authority Accountability and Reform Initiative. So for now, thanks all very much. Good night to everyone. We have recorded this session and we'll be sending it out to friends and family and supporters of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs in the next day or so. So anyone who was not able to join tonight will be sending by email sort of highlights from this discussion and probably a link to where people can download it on YouTube. So thank you all very much. Good night to everyone, and we'll see you at some point tomorrow.